I never thought I'd be the center of a family war. Growing up in Boston with my sister Emma and our parents, life was simple. Mom taught elementary school. Dad ran a small accounting firm, and we lived in a modest house in Dorchester. We weren't rich, but we had enough. What made us special was Grandma Rose's house in Cape Cod, a beautiful Victorian by the sea where we spent every summer. Those memories are like photographs in my mind. Building sandcastles at sunset, fishing off the pier with Dad, and listening to Grandma's stories on the porch swing. When Grandma Rose passed away last fall, I expected her house would be sold and the money split between Mom and Uncle Thomas. That's how these things usually work, right? But at the reading of the will, everything changed. To my granddaughter Olivia, the lawyer read in his monotone voice, I leave my house in Cape Cod and all its contents. The silence in that room was deafening. Uncle Thomas's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. My cousin Patrick stared at me like I'd stolen something right out of his hands. Even Mom looked shocked, though she tried to hide it. There must be some mistake, Uncle Thomas said, his voice strained. Mother always said the house would go to both her children. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The will is quite clear, Mr. Bennett. Your mother revised it 3 years ago. I sat there paralyzed, feeling everyone's eyes on me. I was only 26, just starting my career as a nurse. What was I supposed to do with a house? And why had Grandma chosen me? Uncle Thomas stormed out, and Patrick followed after giving me one last glare. Mom squeezed my hand. She must have had her reasons, Liv. The drive home was tense. Dad tried to lighten the mood, but Mom was quiet. I knew she was wondering the same thing as everyone else. Why me and not her? That night, my phone exploded with messages from Uncle Thomas's side of the family. Some accused me of manipulating Grandma in her final years. Others demanded I do the right thing and sell the house to split the money. Aunt Karen, Thomas's wife, called to remind me how they'd helped pay for Grandma's care when she got sick. We invested 10 years of our lives and thousands of dollars in that house, she said. And you, who barely visited after you started college, get everything? Her words stung because they weren't entirely untrue. I had been busy with nursing school, and then my job at Massachusetts General. My visits had become less frequent. But Grandma and I had talked on the phone every Sunday without fail. We'd shared our lives in those calls. My struggles at work, my breakup with Jason, my dreams for the future. Had those conversations meant more to her than I realized? The next day, I drove to Cape Cod alone. The house stood just as I remembered. Weathered gray shingles, blue shutters, and a wraparound porch facing the ocean. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the front door. Inside, everything was exactly the same, yet somehow different. Grandma's presence lingered in the hand-knitted afghans draped over the sofa, the collection of seashells on the mantel, the faint smell of cinnamon that always filled her kitchen. I wandered from room to room, running my fingers along furniture that had witnessed generations of family moments. In Grandma's bedroom, I found a letter addressed to me on her writing desk. Her familiar handwriting made my eyes well up before I even opened it. My dearest Olivia, it began. If you're reading this, then you know I've left you my home. I imagine the family isn't too happy about it, especially Thomas. But I want you to understand why. This house has always been filled with love, and I've watched you grow into someone who understands what that truly means. You see people, Olivia. You listen. When everyone was arguing about what to do with me when I got sick, you were the only one who asked what I wanted. I remembered that conversation. Uncle Thomas and Mom had been debating assisted living versus home care, their voices rising in the kitchen while Grandma sat forgotten in the living room. I'd slipped away to sit beside her, holding her papery hand and asking, "What do you want, Grandma?" Her letter continued. This house doesn't need someone who sees it as an investment or a vacation spot. It needs someone who will love it, who will bring life into these old rooms. Maybe someday you'll have children who'll build sandcastles on the same beach where you once played. Maybe you'll find a partner who'll sit with you on the porch swing as the sun sets. Or maybe you'll just find peace here when life gets too loud. Whatever you choose, the house is yours with no strings attached. All I ask is that you make room for joy within these walls. I folded the letter, my hand shaking. Grandma had seen something in me that I hadn't fully recognized in myself, but her gift had come with an unexpected price. A family divided. My phone rang. It was Mom. "How is it?" she asked softly. "It's still Grandma's house," I said, looking out at the ocean. "Just emptier now." "Thomas is talking about contesting the will," she warned. "He says Rose wasn't in her right mind when she changed it." The words felt like a slap. "That's not true, and you know it. Grandma was sharp until the end." Mom sighed. "I know, honey, but Thomas feels betrayed. He's been counting on selling that house for his retirement." "And what about you?" I asked, afraid of her answer. "Do you think I should give it up?" There was a pause. I think my mother made her choice, and she wasn't a woman who did anything without careful thought. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with sadness. The house that had once brought our family together was now driving us apart. That evening, I sat on the porch swing watching the waves. A text from my cousin Patrick popped up. "Hope you're enjoying your theft." I turned off my phone. The inheritance that should have felt like a blessing now felt like a burden. But as the ocean breeze wrapped around me, I could almost hear Grandma whispering, "Stand your ground, Olivia. Some gifts are worth fighting for." And in that moment, I decided I would. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about honoring Grandma's wishes, about proving she hadn't misplaced her faith in me. The family war had just begun, but I wasn't going to surrender without a fight. The family meeting was Mom's idea. "We need to clear the air," she insisted over the phone. 2 months of cold shoulders and nasty texts isn't solving anything." I agreed reluctantly. Maybe it was time to face everyone instead of hiding out in Grandma's house. My house, avoiding the conflict. So on a chilly Saturday in March, they all arrived. Mom and Dad, Uncle Thomas and Aunt Karen, cousins Patrick and Melissa. The tension they brought made the spacious living room feel claustrophobic. Uncle Thomas spoke first, not bothering with pleasantries. "I've consulted with a lawyer," he announced, standing by the fireplace like he was making a corporate presentation. "There are grounds to contest the will. Mother changed it when she was 78, and we have concerns about undue influence." I felt my face flush. Undue influence? You mean talking to my grandmother on the phone every week? Sending her cards? Being her granddaughter? "You were her nurse," Patrick chimed in, arms crossed. "You knew exactly what to say to manipulate her." "I wasn't her nurse. I'm a nurse in general. There's a difference." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm, and I never once discussed the will with Grandma. Mom stepped in. "Thomas, Rose was perfectly competent when she changed her will. Dr. Miller saw her regularly, and he can attest to that. She was old and impressionable," Aunt Karen said, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she gestured dismissively. "And I'm sorry, but it's just not fair. We've put money into maintaining this place for years. New roof in 2018, updated plumbing in 2020. Where was Olivia then? I was working 60-hour weeks at the hospital and paying off student loans," I shot back. "And Grandma never asked me for money." Dad, ever the peacemaker, raised his hands. "Maybe there's a compromise here. Olivia, what if you kept the house but compensated the family for their investments over the years?" I looked around at these people I'd known all my life, now staring at me like I was a thief. The weight of their expectation pressed down on me. They were waiting for me to cave, to admit I didn't deserve what Grandma had given me. "I found Grandma's financial records," I said quietly, pulling a folder from the drawer of the side table. "Every repair, every renovation, she paid for all of it herself. She kept meticulous records." Uncle Thomas's face reddened. "That's not possible. We sent her money regularly." "Yes, you did," I agreed, flipping through the papers. "And she saved it. For you." I pulled out a bank statement. She opened college funds for Patrick and Melissa. There's over $30,000 in each account. Melissa's eyes widened, but Patrick scoffed. "We're way past college." "Then it's just a gift," I said. "But the point is, she never spent your money on this house. She wanted you to have it for yourselves." Uncle Thomas snatched the papers from me, scanning them with narrowed eyes. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Grandma's old clock on the mantel. "This doesn't change anything," he finally said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "The house should still be part of the estate for all of us to share." I stood up, surprising even myself with my steadiness. "I want to show you something." I led them upstairs to the small room that had always been mine during summer visits. Opening the closet, I pulled out a stack of sketchbooks. Grandma kept everything, I explained, laying them on the bed. Each book was filled with drawings I'd made over the years. The lighthouse at dawn, seagulls on the beach, Grandma knitting on the porch. She saved every birthday card I sent, every letter from nursing school. I pointed to the bulletin board where she'd pinned them all. She saved our stuff too, Patrick muttered, but he sounded less certain. I'm sure she did, I nodded. Grandma loved all of us, but this house... I gazed out the window at the ocean beyond. This house was special to me in a way you all couldn't understand because you had so much more. Uncle Thomas, you had the family business, the big house in Wellesley, the country club membership. Patrick and Melissa, you had private schools and European vacations. We worked hard for those things, Aunt Karen interjected. I know you did, but this house was the only place I ever felt special. Grandma knew that. When I was 12, I told her I wanted to live here forever. She said maybe someday I would. Mom's eyes filled with tears. You never told me that. The room felt different now. The anger had faded, replaced by something more complicated, a mixture of memory and loss that we all shared. Uncle Thomas cleared his throat. Even if what you're saying is true, this property is worth over $1 million. It's not just about sentimentality. I know, I said, meeting his gaze. That's why I've made a decision. I'm not selling the house and I'm not giving it up, but I am opening it to the family. I explained my plan. The house would remain mine, as Grandma intended, but every family member would have guaranteed time here each year, 2 weeks for each household, scheduled in advance. All I asked was that they respect the property and contribute to a maintenance fund for repairs. It's not what you wanted, I acknowledged, but it honors what Grandma wanted while still keeping the house in the family for everyone to enjoy. Uncle Thomas stared out the window for a long moment. We'll consider it, he finally said. That wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. As they filed out of the room, Mom lingered behind. Your grandmother would be proud of you, she whispered, squeezing my hand. You didn't back down, but you didn't shut them out either. After they left, I walked along the beach, the March wind whipping my hair. 2 gulls squabbled over a piece of shell before flying off in opposite directions. Families were messy, I reflected. You couldn't force harmony, but you could create space for it to grow. That night, Emma called. My sister had been traveling in Australia during all the drama, getting updates from Mom but staying out of it. So how'd it go? She asked. World War III? More like a ceasefire, I said, curling up on Grandma's old armchair. They're still not happy, but I think they're starting to understand. Good for you, standing your ground, Emma said. I've been worried you'd give in just to keep the peace. I almost did, I admitted. But then I remembered something Grandma used to say. Peace at any price isn't peace at all. It's surrender. Emma laughed. Sounds like her. So what now? I looked around the quiet house, imagining summer voices filling it again. Children running up and down the stairs, screen doors slamming, the smell of clam chowder drifting from the kitchen. Now I make this place mine, I said, while keeping it a little bit everyone's too. Delicate balance, Emma commented. Life usually is, I replied. And for the first time since the will reading, I felt something like peace settle over me. The war wasn't over. Uncle Thomas wouldn't give up easily, and Patrick might never forgive me, but I'd found my footing. Grandma had trusted me with her legacy, and I wouldn't let her down. Outside, the tide was coming in, waves washing away the day's footprints on the sand. Tomorrow would bring fresh tracks, fresh challenges, but tonight, in this house by the sea, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Spring turned to summer, and an uneasy truce settled over our family. Uncle Thomas had grudgingly accepted my compromise, though our conversations remained strained and formal. Patrick still refused to speak to me directly, communicating through his sister Melissa when necessary. At least Melissa had softened, especially after spending a weekend at the house in May. I forgot how peaceful it is here, she'd admitted, watching the sunset from the porch. Patrick's being stubborn, but he'll come around eventually. I wasn't so sure. Some wounds don't heal easily, especially when pride is involved. I'd taken a leave of absence from the hospital to spend the summer in Cape Cod, partly to establish my presence in the house, but mostly because I needed space to figure out my next steps. Boston felt distant now, my apartment there more of a storage unit than a home. Each morning, I woke to the sound of waves and seagulls, feeling Grandma's presence in every corner of the house. I'd started making small changes, repainting the kitchen a soft blue instead of its faded yellow, updating the ancient washing machine, clearing out decades of accumulated magazines from the sunroom. Nothing drastic, just enough to make the place functional for a young woman living alone. Each change felt like a conversation with Grandma. "Is this okay?" I'd ask aloud sometimes, imagining her practical nod. It was during one of these renovation days in July that I discovered the box in the attic. I'd gone up there searching for an old fan, sweating in the stuffy heat as I picked through holiday decorations and forgotten furniture. The wooden chest was tucked under the eaves, its brass latch tarnished with age. Inside were bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, photographs I'd never seen before, and a journal with Rose Bennett 1956 written on the first page. I brought everything downstairs and spent the afternoon at the kitchen table, piecing together a story I'd never known. The letters were from a man named James Sullivan, written over the course of 2 years. The photographs showed a younger version of my grandmother with a tall, dark-haired man on this very beach. And the journal revealed a Rose Bennett I'd never met, a young woman passionately in love with a man her family disapproved of. "Mother says I must end things with James," she'd written in one entry. "She says the Sullivans are beneath us, that I will regret throwing my life away on a fisherman's son. But when I'm with him, nothing else matters. He understands me in ways no one else ever has." I read until sunset, following the doomed romance through seasons of joy and heartbreak. James was Catholic. The Bennetts were staunch Protestants. James's family had lived in Cape Cod for generations, working-class people who made their living from the sea. The Bennetts were successful merchants from Boston, who viewed their summer home as evidence of their social climbing. The differences proved insurmountable. In the final letter, James wrote of taking a job on a merchant vessel, leaving Massachusetts perhaps forever. The last journal entry was tear-stained. "I've done what they asked. James is gone, and I will marry Edward next spring as planned. Mother says I'll forget in time, that this kind of love is just youthful folly. Father says I've made the right choice for my future, but it doesn't feel right. It feels like dying. Edward." My grandfather, who'd passed away before I was born. Their marriage had lasted over 40 years until his death, producing 2 children, my mother and Uncle Thomas. By all accounts, it had been a good marriage, stable and comfortable. But had Grandma ever forgotten James? The next day, I drove to the local historical society. The elderly volunteer at the desk perked up when I mentioned the Sullivan family. "Oh, the Sullivans, one of the oldest fishing families in town. Now, let me think. James Sullivan would have been..." She tapped her fingers on the desk. "He was about your grandmother's age. Handsome fellow, as I recall. Left town in the 50s, came back about 20 years later after his wife died. Lived in that little blue house by the harbor until he passed in 2012. My heart raced. He came back? Did he and my grandmother ever reconnect?" The woman gave me a knowing look. "Small town, dear. People talk, but I try not to gossip about the departed." She hesitated, then leaned forward. "Though I will say your grandmother volunteered here every Thursday for years, and so did James." I thanked her and left, my mind spinning. Had Grandma maintained a connection with her first love all those years? Had they rekindled something after my grandfather died? Or had they simply found a way to be friends, sharing history and memory in their twilight years? Back at the house, I called Mom. "Did you know Grandma was in love with someone before Grandpa?" I asked without preamble. The silence on the other end told me everything. "Where did you hear about James?" she finally asked. "I found letters in the attic, and her journal." Mom sighed. "I only knew pieces. After Dad died, she mentioned him once or twice. I got the impression they'd reconnected somehow. But Grandma was private about her personal life. Did Uncle Thomas know?" "I doubt it. Thomas idolized our father. He wouldn't have wanted to hear about any other man in Mom's life." I thought about that as I sat on the porch that evening, watching the same ocean James and Grandma had gazed at together 70 years ago. Had the house been a connection to him all these years? Is that why she'd held on to it so fiercely, even when Uncle Thomas suggested selling it after Grandpa died. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Uncle Thomas's Mercedes pulled into the driveway around noon. He rarely came alone, and my stomach knotted as I watched him approach, his face unreadable behind sunglasses. "We need to talk," he said as I opened the door. In the living room, he declined my offer of lemonade and sat stiffly on the edge of Grandma's favorite chair. "Patrick told me you're making changes to the house, so that was it. Melissa must have mentioned my renovations to her brother." "Nothing major," I assured him. "Just some paint, a few appliance upgrades. The washing machine was from the 1980s, Uncle Thomas." He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes so like my mother's. "This house has been the same for as long as I can remember. Every summer of my childhood, everything was exactly where it belonged. That consistency meant something. For the first time, I glimpsed the emotional attachment beneath his anger. This wasn't just about money or fairness. It was about preserving a past he cherished. "I'm not erasing anything important," I said gently. "The furniture is the same. The photos are still on the walls. I'm just making it livable for today." He glanced around, perhaps checking that I was telling the truth. His gaze landed on the box of letters I'd left on the coffee table. "What's that?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Letters I found in the attic, from a man Grandma loved before Grandpa." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" I explained about James Sullivan, showing him the photographs and journal entries. He listened in rigid silence, his jaw tightening with each word. "This is absurd," he finally said. "Mother was devoted to my father. This is just some youthful infatuation. It doesn't mean anything." "It meant something to her," I countered. "She kept these letters for 70 years. Uncle Thomas stood abruptly. "I don't know what you're trying to prove with this invasion of privacy. But my mother and father had a perfect marriage. Whatever schoolgirl crush you've dug up doesn't change that." "I'm not trying to rewrite their story," I said, keeping my voice even. "But Grandma was a complete person with a past that shaped her. Don't you want to know who she really was?" He stared at me for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering across his face before the anger returned. I knew who she was. She was my mother. He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'd appreciate it if you kept this discovery to yourself. There's no need to tarnish everyone's memories with ancient history." After he left, I sat with the letters again, tracing Grandma's handwriting with my fingertips. Uncle Thomas wanted to preserve a perfect image of his parents' marriage, unsullied by complication or compromise. But wasn't the reality that Grandma had loved deeply, lost painfully, and still built a good life with another man far more remarkable? The house felt different now, layered with new meaning. It wasn't just a vacation home or a valuable piece of real estate. It was the backdrop to a love story, a place where my grandmother had perhaps found ways to honor both her past and her present. That night, I finished painting the kitchen. The blue was different from what Grandma would have chosen, but as I watched the evening light play across the walls, I imagined her standing there with James in another life, laughing, dancing, building a different kind of future than the one she'd lived. "I'll take care of our house," I whispered to her memory, and to his. Perhaps that's why she'd left it to me. Not because I was her favorite, but because she sensed I would understand its complicated history, the joy and heartache embedded in its walls. In the morning, I called a stonecutter in town. "I'd like to place a bench," I explained, "on the bluff overlooking the beach, with an inscription." When it was installed the following week, I sat there alone, watching the endless cycle of waves against the shore. The words carved into the granite were simple. For R and J, who found their way back to the sea. Some secrets belong to history, but others deserve to breathe in the open air, to be honored under the vast sky. Grandma had entrusted me with her house. I would honor that trust by making it a place where truth, in all its messy complexity, was welcome. By August, Cape Cod was in full tourist season. The beaches were crowded with sunbathers, the narrow streets clogged with rental cars, and the shops bustling with visitors buying overpriced souvenirs. I'd learned to wake up early to have my quiet time on the beach before the crowds arrived, often returning to the house as the first families were setting up their umbrellas and coolers for the day. It was during one of these morning walks that I ran into Patrick. He was jogging along the shoreline, so focused on his pace that he nearly crashed into me as I bent to examine a piece of sea glass. Sorry, He stopped short when he recognized me. Oh, hi, Patrick. I tucked the sea glass into my pocket. I didn't know you were in town. He shifted uncomfortably, sweat glistening on his forehead. Just for the weekend. Staying at the Harbor Inn. The Harbor Inn was expensive, especially in summer. Patrick could have stayed at the house for free. I'd made it clear the family scheduling system was already in effect, but pride was a powerful thing. Nice morning for a run, I offered, trying to fill the awkward silence. He nodded, looking past me toward the lighthouse. Dad told me about the letters you found. That surprised me. Uncle Thomas hadn't struck me as someone who would share such a revelation. Oh? He thinks you're trying to rewrite family history. Patrick's tone was accusatory, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Were they really love letters? They were. I hesitated, then added, Would you like to see them? He seemed taken aback by the offer. I don't know, maybe. The house is right there. I gestured up the beach. I made coffee. I half expected him to refuse, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Just for a few minutes. The walk back was silent but less tense than I'd anticipated. At the house, Patrick paused on the porch, taking in the fresh paint on the shutters and the new cushions on the wicker furniture. It looks good, he admitted reluctantly. Different, but good. In the kitchen, I poured coffee while Patrick examined the blue walls. Grandma would have liked this color, he said, surprising me again. She always said the kitchen was too yellow. Really? I thought you'd be upset about the changes. He shrugged. Dad's the one who wants everything frozen in time. I just went along with it because... He trailed off, struggling to articulate something complicated. Because you feel I took something that should have been partly yours, I finished for him. His gaze met mine directly for the first time in months. Wouldn't you feel the same way if the situation was reversed? It was a fair question. Probably, I admitted. But I'd like to think I would have tried to understand Grandma's reasons instead of declaring war. Patrick sipped his coffee, saying nothing. I retrieved the box of letters from the living room. Here, take a look if you want. He hesitated, then carefully lifted the top letter from the stack. As he read, his expression softened. I've never known anyone with a mind like yours. He read aloud. You see the world in colors I've never imagined. Wow. This guy was seriously into Grandma. James Sullivan, I supplied. They grew up together here in Cape Cod. Different social classes, different religions. Her parents disapproved. Patrick flipped through more letters, pausing at the photographs. She looks happy, he observed. Different from how I remember her. She was 18 when these were taken. Whole life ahead of her. He looked up. Did she regret marrying Grandpa instead? I don't think so. I think she loved him too, just differently. And she had Mom and your dad and all of us. I traced the edge of my coffee mug. But I think a part of her always wondered what might have been. Patrick set down the letters carefully. So she left you the house because... I'm not entirely sure. But I think it was partly because I was the only one who saw her as a complete person. Not just as Grandma. We talked about real things. My struggles at work, my fears, my dreams. I told her about my breakups and my successes. She told me stories about her life. Maybe she sensed I would understand this part of her story too. He nodded slowly. Dad always put her on this pedestal. Perfect mother, perfect wife. I guess it would be hard to live up to that. Very hard, I agreed. Maybe impossible. We sat in companionable silence for a moment. Then Patrick cleared his throat. I still think the inheritance was unfair. But I shouldn't have been such a jerk about it. Your compromise was reasonable. Coming from Patrick, this was the equivalent of a full apology and surrender. I fought to keep my expression neutral. Thanks. That means a lot. He glanced at his watch. I should go. Melissa and I are meeting for breakfast. Invite her to come by later if you want. I put fresh sheets in all the guest rooms. No point staying at the Harbor Inn when there's plenty of space here. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. I'll think about it. After he left, I sat on the porch, watching the beach fill with people. The morning's encounter felt significant. like the first crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable. Patrick might never become my biggest fan, but maybe we could find a way to be family again. That afternoon, my phone rang with a call from a Boston number I didn't recognize. "Is this Olivia Bennett?" a man's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Michael Sullivan. I believe you've been asking around town about my grandfather, James Sullivan." My heart skipped. "Yes, I have. I found some letters he wrote to my grandmother, Rose Bennett." There was a pause. "Would it be possible for us to meet? There are some things about their story you might want to know." We arranged to meet the next day at a cafe in town. As I hung up, I felt a flutter of anticipation. The story I'd pieced together from letters and journal entries was incomplete. Michael Sullivan might hold the missing pieces. That evening, to my surprise, Patrick and Melissa showed up at the door with their overnight bags. The inn was too noisy, Patrick claimed, though I suspected the real reason had more to do with curiosity than accommodations. As we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Melissa asked about the letters. I told them what I knew, and about the call from Michael Sullivan. "I'm coming with you tomorrow," Patrick declared. "If this guy knows something about our grandmother, I want to hear it too." "Me too," Melissa chimed in. "This is like a mystery novel unfolding in real life." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening. "Grandma would love this," I said. "All of us together, trying to understand her better. She'd probably say we're making a fuss over nothing," Patrick countered, but he was smiling too. As night fell, the three of us sat listening to the waves, sharing memories of summers past. The house felt alive again, filled with voices and laughter. Whatever revelations tomorrow might bring, tonight was a victory, a small step toward healing the rift that had threatened to tear our family apart. Looking out at the darkened ocean, I whispered a silent thank you to Grandma Rose. Her final gift wasn't just the house. It was the journey we were on because of it, a journey toward understanding not just her, but ourselves. The cafe where I'd arranged to meet Michael Sullivan was a small place near the harbor, touristy, but not overly crowded on a weekday morning. Patrick, Melissa, and I arrived early, claiming a table by the window with a view of the boats bobbing in the water. "How will you recognize him?" Melissa asked, stirring her latte. "He said he'd be wearing a blue cap with a fishing boat logo," I replied, scanning the entrance. Patrick drummed his fingers on the table. "What if this is just some scam? Guy heard about the rich Bennett family and cooked up a story to get money." "Always the skeptic," Melissa sighed. "Not everyone is after our money, Pat. Statistically speaking, a surprising number of people are," he retorted, but there was no real bite to his words. I spotted him before he spotted us. A man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and the promised blue cap. He had a weathered face and bright blue eyes that surveyed the cafe carefully. Something about those eyes seemed familiar. I raised my hand, and he nodded, making his way to our table. "Olivia?" he asked, his voice the same as on the phone. "Yes, and these are my cousins, Patrick and Melissa Bennett." Michael shook hands with all of us, settling into the fourth chair. Up close, the familiarity of his features was even more striking. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his mouth, they reminded me of photographs I'd seen of James Sullivan. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said, ordering coffee when the waitress came by. I admit, I was surprised when Mrs. Henderson from the Historical Society called to say someone was asking about my grandfather. "Mrs. Henderson called you?" I asked. He smiled. "Small towns, no secrets. So, James Sullivan was really your grandfather?" Melissa leaned forward eagerly. "Yes, my father's father. He raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 10. Michael's eyes softened with memory. He was a remarkable man. Fished these waters for over 60 years, knew every current and tide pattern. Could tell you when a storm was coming just by the way the gulls flew. And he knew our grandmother," Patrick stated, more than asked. Michael nodded. "More than knew her. He loved her his entire life. There was something in his tone, a certainty, a finality, that made my pulse quicken. The letters I found ended in 1956 when he left town. But the lady at the Historical Society said he came back years later. He left on a merchant vessel, worked his way around the world for almost a decade," Michael confirmed. "Eventually settled in California, married my grandmother, had my father. But after my grandmother died in the mid-70s, he came back to Cape Cod, said he'd seen enough of the world and wanted to die where he was born. And he reconnected with our grandmother? I asked. Michael's gaze met mine. They never fully disconnected. The three of us exchanged glances. What does that mean? Patrick asked. Michael pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. You should see these first. Inside were photographs, my grandmother and James Sullivan together, but much older than in the images I'd found. They were standing on the same beach, gray-haired but smiling. Another showed them at what looked like a community picnic. A third captured them sitting on a bench, the same spot where I'd recently placed the granite memorial. These were taken in the 80s and 90s, Michael explained. After your grandfather died, they saw each other openly. Before that, they were careful. Patrick's face darkened. Are you suggesting they had an affair while our grandfather was alive? Michael shook his head. Not physical, no. My grandfather respected marriage too much for that. But they wrote to each other for decades. Birthday cards, Christmas greetings, brief notes about their lives, always signed with their initials only, in case the letters were found. How do you know all this? I asked quietly. Grandpa told me everything before he died. Said someone should know the truth. Michael sipped his coffee. He wanted me to understand that some loves don't die, even when circumstances make them impossible. That sometimes the most honorable thing isn't following your heart, but honoring your commitments while keeping your heart intact. I thought about the journal entries I'd read. The young Rose Bennett sacrificing her first love to meet her family's expectations. How many quiet compromises had filled the decades that followed. This is a lot to process, Patrick said, his voice tight. You're basically telling us our grandmother lived a double life. I'm telling you she lived a full life, Michael corrected gently. She loved your grandfather. By all accounts, they had a good marriage. She raised her children well. But she also preserved a connection to her first love. I don't see that as a betrayal, but as a remarkable balancing act. Melissa, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. The Thursday volunteering at the Historical Society. That was their cover for spending time together, wasn't it? Michael nodded. They really did volunteer, cataloging old photographs and documents. But it gave them a few hours together each week, where no one would question them being in the same place. Did anyone in town know? I asked. Some suspected, I'm sure, but people here respected their privacy. He hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know. About the house. We all leaned forward slightly. This house belonged to my grandfather's family originally, Michael said. The Sullivans built it in the 1880s, when they had a profitable fishing business. But during the Depression, they fell on hard times and had to sell it. The Bennetts bought it as their summer home. I tried to absorb this new information. So when Grandma spent summers here as a girl, she was living in the house where James had grown up. That's how they met. He still lived nearby and worked on the fishing boats. The first time they spoke, he told her she was sleeping in what used to be his bedroom. The revelation settled over us like a spell. The house had belonged to the Sullivans before it belonged to the Bennetts. No wonder it had meant so much to both of them. There's more, Michael continued. After your grandfather died, my grandfather offered to buy the house back. He'd saved his whole life, had the money ready, but your grandmother refused to sell it to him. Why? Melissa asked. Because she wanted it to stay in her family. Specifically, his eyes met mine. With you, Olivia. I felt as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. How do you know that? Grandpa told me. They talked about the future often as they got older. She told him her plans for the house years before she changed her will. Patrick looked as stunned as I felt. But why Olivia specifically? Michael shrugged. I can't answer that for certain. But my grandfather had a theory. He said Rose saw something of herself in you. A kind of independence, a way of looking at the world. He said she told him once that you were the only one who asked questions about her life, not just as a grandmother, but as a woman who'd lived through changing times. The cafe seemed to fade around me as the pieces clicked into place. The long phone calls with Grandma, the stories she'd told me about her youth, the way she'd encouraged me to follow my own path even when it was difficult. There's one last thing. Michael reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small box. My grandfather wanted Rose to have this, but she refused. Said it would raise too many questions. After she died, I found it among his things with a note asking me to give it to whoever inherited the house. He slid the box across the table. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm. A tiny house. He had it made in the 60s, Michael explained. Said it represented what they'd lost and what they'd found. A home in each other, even when they couldn't be together physically. I looked up to find Patrick watching me, his expression unreadable. So, all this time, he said slowly, the house was never just about money or fairness. It was about a love story none of us knew about. Not all love stories are straightforward, Michael said. Some take detours, span decades, shape families in ways no one sees. We talked for another hour, Michael sharing stories his grandfather had told him about Rose, how she loved poetry and knew every constellation in the night sky, how she once swam all the way to the sandbar and back when they were teenagers, how she could name every type of seashell on the beach. When we finally parted ways, Michael handing me a folder of photographs to keep, something had shifted between Patrick, Melissa, and me. The house we'd been fighting over now felt like something different. Not just an inheritance or an investment, but a chapter in a larger story that had been unfolding for nearly a century. Walking back along the harbor, the silver bracelet cool against my wrist, I thought about Grandma's final gift. Not just the house or its history, but the truth, messy, complicated, and ultimately beautiful, about the capacity of the human heart to contain multitudes. Uncle Thomas arrived unannounced the next day, his Mercedes kicking up dust as it pulled into the driveway. I was sitting on the porch, going through the photographs Michael Sullivan had given me, when I heard the car door slam. "The kid said you found James Sullivan's grandson," he called as he climbed the steps. No greeting, no pleasantries. That was Uncle Thomas, direct to the point of abruptness. "Hello to you too," I replied, setting aside the photos. "Yes, we met him yesterday." Uncle Thomas settled heavily into the wicker chair opposite mine, looking tired. He'd aged in the month since Grandma's death, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair grayer. And he told us some things about Grandma and James. Things you probably don't want to hear. He sighed, removing his sunglasses to rub his eyes. Patrick already called me. Said they wrote to each other for years. Said the house originally belonged to the Sullivans. I nodded, surprised that Patrick had taken the initiative to call his father. That's the gist of it. Uncle Thomas gazed out at the ocean, his expression distant. "I found a letter once when I was about 16. It was in her desk drawer. Just a birthday card, really, signed with the initial J. I asked her about it, and she said it was from an old school friend. I believed her." He shook his head. "Kids never really see their parents as people, do they? With their own histories, their own secrets. I think that's normal," I said gently. "We want to see them as just our parents. Your mother was always different that way, more curious about who Mom was before she had us. I just wanted her to be straightforward, predictable." He smiled grimly. Turns out she was the most unpredictable of all. I offered him the folder of photographs. "You might want to see these. They were taken after Grandpa died, when Grandma and James were spending time together openly." He hesitated, then took the folder, flipping through the images with careful movements. I watched his face, expecting anger or denial, but what I saw instead was a more complex emotion. Something like grief mixed with dawning understanding. "She looks happy," he finally said, his voice rough. "Happier than I remember her being with Dad, if I'm honest." "I think she loved them both," I offered, "just in different ways." He nodded slowly. "Mom was from a different generation. People didn't divorce then, didn't follow their hearts if it meant breaking commitments. They endured." He handed back the folder. "I've spent my whole life trying to live up to my father's expectations, even after he was gone. Straight A student, Harvard Business School, taking over the family firm, marrying Karen because she came from the right kind of family. Sometimes I wonder," he trailed off. "Wonder what? If I've ever made a single choice that was truly mine." He looked at me directly. "That's why you got the house, you know. Because you make your own choices, consequences be damned." I was startled by this insight. "Is that what Grandma told you?" "She didn't have to." He gestured around at the porch, the ocean beyond. You were always different here, more yourself. The rest of us were playing roles. The successful son, the perfect grandchildren. You were just Olivia, asking questions, making messes, challenging everything. Mom loved that about you. The admission hung between us like a fragile thing. Uncle Thomas had never spoken to me this way, never revealed anything so personal. I'm sorry about how I reacted to the will, he said after a moment. It wasn't really about the money. It was about feeling like she chose you over me, over all of us. She didn't, though. Not really. I twisted the silver bracelet on my wrist. I think she chose to honor a part of her life that had been hidden too long. The house connects to James, to their story. Maybe she wanted someone to finally know the whole truth. Uncle Thomas nodded, seeming to accept this. Patrick mentioned your offer to let us use the house. I appreciate that. It's only fair. This is still a family home. He glanced at his watch, already retreating behind his usual reserve. I should go. Karen's expecting me back for dinner. He stood, hesitating. The bench you put on the bluff. Patrick told me about that too. For R&J, I confirmed. I didn't know the full story then, but it felt right. It is right, he said quietly. Thank you for doing that for her. After he left, I sat watching the afternoon light play on the waves, thinking about the generations that had passed through this house, the Sullivans who built it, the Bennetts who summered in it, and now me, trying to honor them all. Mom called that evening, eager to hear about the meeting with Michael Sullivan. So it's true? She asked after I recounted everything. They kept in touch all those years? Apparently so. I curled up on the window seat in what had been Grandma's bedroom. Did you ever suspect anything? I had moments of wondering. After Dad died, she seemed to find her footing so quickly. Started volunteering, joined a book club, seemed almost energized. I remember thinking it was strange for a new widow to seem so alive. She paused. Once, I ran into her having lunch with a man in town. She introduced him as James, said he was on the Historical Society board with her. I didn't think much of it at the time. That was him, I confirmed. James Sullivan. Looking back, I can see it now. The way she lit up when she talked about her volunteer days, the walks she took alone on the beach. Mom sounded contemplative rather than upset. I'm glad she had that. After a lifetime of doing what was expected, she deserved some happiness on her own terms. We talked until darkness fell, sharing memories of Grandma, seeing them now through this new lens of understanding. When we hung up, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The next morning, I woke early and walked down to the beach. The tide was out, revealing a wide stretch of sand dotted with shells. I collected a few, remembering how Grandma and I used to do this together when I was small. She knew the name of each one: angel wing, jingle shell, moon snail. Back at the house, I arranged them on the windowsill, a small altar to memory. Then I opened my laptop and began to write. Not just Grandma's story, but the story of the house itself, built by Sullivans, bought by Bennetts, now a bridge between past and present. As September approached, I faced a decision. My leave of absence from the hospital was ending. I needed to choose whether to return to Boston or stay in Cape Cod. The answer came more easily than I expected. I called my supervisor and resigned, then applied for a position at the local medical center. The salary would be lower, the prestige less, but something about being here felt right in a way Boston never had. The house was changing me, or perhaps revealing who I'd always been beneath the busy nurse, the dutiful granddaughter, the peacemaking niece. Here, with the constant sound of waves and the shifting light on the water, I was finding my own rhythm. Uncle Thomas called a week later with surprising news. I've been thinking about what you said, about making choices that are truly mine. His voice had an unfamiliar energy. I'm taking a sabbatical from the firm. 6 months, maybe a year. Really? What will you do? Travel. Read books that aren't about business strategy. Maybe learn to sail. He laughed, the sound so unexpected it made me smile. Karen thinks I'm having a midlife crisis. Are you? Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally having an authentic response to learning my mother kept part of herself hidden for decades. Either way, it feels necessary. After we hung up, I walked through the house. touching the walls that had witnessed so much: joy and sorrow, secrets and revelations, love deferred and love reclaimed. My house now, but always Grandma's too, and James's, and all the Sullivans and Bennets who had lived here before us. Outside, the September light was golden on the water. Soon the tourists would be gone, the beaches empty, the town quiet for the winter. Patrick and Melissa had already booked a week for Thanksgiving, and Mom was coming for Christmas. Even Uncle Thomas had tentatively asked about bringing his sailboat next summer. The family war had ended, not with a surrender, but with a deeper understanding. We were all more complicated than we appeared, just as Grandma had been, just as the house itself was more than just wood and glass and stone. On the bluff, I sat on the granite bench, feeling the sun warm on my face. "I understand now," I whispered, though there was no one to hear. "Why you chose me. Why the house matters." The only answer was the sound of waves breaking against the shore, constant as a heartbeat, enduring as love, but somehow it was enough.